Welcome to Debating Russia here on Voice of Russia. I'm Peter Lavelle. Today's topic, Russia and the changing Middle East. The events happening in Syria are happening very, very fast. We have indications from the Americans that they're interested in negotiating a peaceful end to this civil war that's been going on for 2 years in Syria. But let's talk about Syria and let's broaden out how Russia looks at the region. I'm joined by Professor Saad Jawad. He's a senior visiting fellow at the Middle East Center at the London School of Economics. We also have Afshin Rattansi. He's an award-winning journalist and novelist and a CEO of Alternative Reality Productions. And here in Moscow sitting with me is Nikolay Surkov. He is an assistant professor at Moscow State Institute of Foreign Relations Middle East expert. Afshin, in London, how does Russia see what's going on in the greater Arab world, in the Muslim world? Because we have a certain narrative in the U.S. and in Western Europe, NATO, let's put it that way. But can you tell our viewers how there can be an alternative understanding of what's going on?
From my perspective, the way Moscow would see things, perhaps one has to look at the Georgia conflict to get a grip as to how foreign policy people in the Kremlin must be looking at it. And presumably they look at it in a very pleased way because time and time again the United States and NATO powers have lost power since that seemingly arcane conflict in Georgia, where, of course, the United States desperately tried to throw out or put in place what Washington wanted. And since then we've seen Afghanistan, Iraq, and most importantly, of course, the so-called Arab Spring, which is actually an overturning of U.S. hegemony in country after country in the Arab world. And as for the Middle East, well, we've seen President Obama vacillate over Syria as his NATO partners desperately try to intervene.
It's very interesting because we had the Turkish prime minister in Washington, and it looks like they're trying to whittle down the number of people that can sit at the table. Again, this is the Russian peace plan is being morphed somehow. Nikolay, I was talking to a correspondent from the New York Times here in Moscow, and she told me, she said, Russia will be punished. Russia is losing influence. Russia is on the wrong side of history. It seems to me, in light of what we just heard, I mean, Russia is on the other side of history, understands the more you meddle in these countries, the worse the outcome.
This is true. This is a genuine Russian position. The more you meddle, the worse it is. So Russian position is mostly conservative. Don't touch it unless it is absolutely necessary. Since Russian politicians and Russian diplomats believe that this region is so fragile and so unstable that the moment you change something in the equation, you can ruin the whole system at once. It's like a house of cards, actually. So for us, it's a genuine fear that the region might explode, simply explode, and it will bury not only the neighboring countries, but it will hurt Russia, and I believe...
I want to talk about that, yes. The implications for Russia. Saad, in London, you know, I think we're in the era of unintended consequences when it comes to the greater Middle East. What do you think about that?
Well, I excuse me if I take a different view from my
Go right ahead.
From my colleague in Russia and in Moscow. I think we in the Middle East feel that since we have lost the support of the Soviet Union, the Middle East was turned over by the policy of the United States. The unipower system played havoc with the countries in the Middle East. We have seen what they have done in Iraq. We have seen what they have done in Somalia. We have seen what they have done in Afghanistan, and they have ruined everything. And they have done nothing good for the people there. Had we had something like the support of the Soviet Union, or at least the firm stand of the Russian Republic in the Middle East, in the Security Council, we wouldn't have had this invasion of Iraq. We wouldn't have the Palestinian problem oscillating from one side to side without a solution. So I think the people in the Middle East are happy about the development of the Russian attitude. Whether this is right or wrong, I don't know, but I think they are happy and they are seeing something out of it. Now the United States coming back to the to Russia in order to negotiate something in the Syrian question.
Afshin, jump in. What do you think about that? It seems to me, if you look at Western media, exclusively Russia is demonized for supporting its friend Assad when not even listening to what the foreign minister has to say about the interests of the Syrian people. Go ahead.
But there's a lot of truth in what Professor Jawad has just said, because one could argue...
I agree.
One could argue that the conservative position, as Nikolay was talking about, why did President Putin not put the S-300 defense system into Syria a year ago? That would have stopped dead the conversation about NATO intervention and presumably aerial bombardment of Damascus. Why is Russia slow? Of course, one could argue the same for Beijing as well, not just Moscow. Instead of just, okay, they'd veto any resolution for war, but, something proactive. I mean, 93,000 people reportedly have been killed in Syria.
We've all been looking at this, and we know that Russia has contracts with Damascus.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of controversy about timing and all of that. And it seems to me, again, Russia being a conservative power in this region is actually looking at, they don't want to tip anything too quickly, make it very clear that they're not going to abandon legal contracts that they have signed, make it clear to everyone so there isn't anything really sudden. Because it's been the rebels, it's been the Qataris, it's been the Saudis, it's been the Americans, it's been NATO that's been pushing things very hard.
Actually, that's another option for Russia. We are not supposed to give up, we're not supposed to abandon our allies. That will hurt our image and our prestige in the region much worse than our other actions. At least what I hear from ordinary people in the streets in the Arab countries, it's the comments like, now Russia shows that it's really ready to stand against the United States. It showed that it has some courage to defend its own positions. So I think, Russia is doing, in that respect, is doing the right thing. It is showing that it has some principles and it is ready to stand, to fight for its principles. Though, if you speak about proactive steps, see, there is this issue of balancing. For example, we can't send S-300 to Syria because it will hurt Israel. And now Russia is not Soviet Union.
Russia can do whatever it wants. It's not bound by anyone else. But I mean, what it's doing is being prudent. I think
Yes.
it's again, I agree with you, Nikolay. I said Russia is engaging everyone in the region, not demonizing anyone.
And ready to work and to negotiate with everyone, not only Assad, not only
Mr.
the opposition.
Netanyahu was in town recently.
Yes, this kind of position is, I think, much more constructive than the one when you tell that these people are bad, they're villains, we're not going to communicate with them. But still, if they have real power and if they influence the situation, then you have to deal with them.
This is Voice of Russia, and you're listening to Debating Russia. I'm Peter Lavelle. Saad, how do you see the American position? Mr. Kerry was very red-faced here when he was patting Mr. Lavrov on the back repeatedly over and over again and thanking Mr. Putin. I mean, how did you read that?
Well, as I said, I think the United States have done nothing constructive to the Middle East. And we have seen what happened in Iraq and what is happening in Iraq now. Afghanistan is still a pending problem.
And Afghanistan.
Afghanistan is another pending problem, as I said. And the other problem, which I should think is an economic one. The Russian have not benefited anything from the Middle East since the surge of the United States and the Western powers in this area, in Libya, in Iraq, in Egypt, and everywhere. So I think it's another thing to think of, and that's what pushed the Russian leaders to take this position. The United States popularity, the United States position in the Middle East is at its lowest, I should think. Nobody trusts the United States anymore because they have seen what happened in Iraq, and they are not doing anything constructive to this country. They have seen what now Mr. Obama, after all his promises to the Palestinians, now he went back and supported Israel unreservedly. So I think they have lost confidence. They have no confidence. They had no confidence in the United States before, but they thought that they may do something, and now they lost this little hope as well.
Afshin, I think it's quite interesting here, is going back to Kerry's visit to Moscow. Russia has a very clear, defined position, actually has a good peace plan that was announced in Geneva last year. And the Russians are looking at the other side. Now, what is the other side? Rebels that are completely out of control, the Qataris, the Saudis. Everyone there on that side has a different position. I mean, the Russians are quite bewildered in how this is going to happen when they're very focused, but no one else is. Everyone else has a different agenda.
But Russia is also on the defensive when it comes to the region, it has to be said, because of the power of Persian Gulf dictatorships. I mean, perhaps one's overplaying it to say that Persian Gulf dictatorships would threaten Moscow with spreading Salafi Wahhabist militancy.
Well, you're going right down the path where I wanted to go in this program, because that's where we want to go next. But keep going. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm speaking to you from London, where a Persian Gulf country like Saudi Arabia could threaten the British government over an arms deal inquiry, saying we will spread, de facto what they were saying, we'll spread terrorism in London. I'm not sure whether they've ever threatened Sergei Lavrov or Mr. Putin with that kind of thing, but these countries are very rich, these countries are very powerful, and seem to have filled that vacuum that, as Professor Jawad was saying, the United States has created.
Well, Nikolay, it seems to me that Western powers, they just don't get the Sunni-Shia difference. They don't see how they're fueling a civil war among these two groups, because they've aligned themselves with Saudi Arabia. And a great deal of the funding for terrorism in the world comes from that part of the world. But America and Saudi Arabia are great allies.
Well, that's true, but you have to see that. What I personally see, now the United States was about to make the same mistake it made in Afghanistan in the 80s. Actually, all this support of the armed Syrian opposition was the same thing like with the Mujahideen. And I was expecting that sooner or later these people will stop fighting in Syria and go to other countries of the region. Actually, that's why Moscow is so much concerned with the situation, because it promotes the outburst of armed Islamism.
This is the Voice of Russia, broadcasting from the heart of London. From Monday to Friday, we're live here on digital from 4 p.m. until 8. We're also online at ruvr.co.uk. Tune in for current affairs, news, arts and debate.
Can I point out something for our listeners? I think from Damascus to Chechnya, it's a 20-hour drive. I think we should put that into perspective. Well, and we had a conflict in the Caucasus that was really horrific, became jihadist in the later stages. Russia knows a lot about this.
It's not only about the Caucasus, actually. Now we're getting more and more news about Islam extremists recruiting young people from Tatarstan to go to Syria and to fight there.
Or maybe go to Boston, Massachusetts.
Well, later on.
Saad, if I can go back to you, when I look at these different countries and different interests here, how can Russia address countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia if there's going to be any true peace process in Syria?
Well, I think Qatar and Saudi Arabia have been given a bigger role than they could chew. I mean, they have been given this role because of the vacuum created in the area. If there were a certain power or a certain force to face their intervention, I don't think they would have gone that far. The problem is that they have succeeded in Libya, and now they are trying the same. The other thing is the United States started the problem of Sunni-Shia differences in Iraq and created this problem in a country where there were no Sunni-Shia struggle in this country, and left it open to be spreading into the other areas. So this is another problem. I think these the Gulf powers, are just imaginary power. They don't have they have the money.
Yeah, but aren't they playing?
Yeah, they are playing
with fire as well.
Yeah, they are playing with fire, and they are sending troops, and they are sending money, and they are encouraging people. And without the encourage of the Qataris and the Saudis and other components in there, and the Turks, I don't think the Syrian opposition would have gone that far. I don't think that Syria would have been in such a catastrophic situation. But as I said, this was also because of the weak policies of Mr. Assad. He didn't take action immediately to silence, or at least not silence, but to put down the discontent in his country. And he reverted to power immediately, and this have developed in such a bloody struggle. But again, if you see the people fighting in Syria, they are not Syrians, all of them. They are people from outside Syria, and they have been sent there to fight. And the Qaeda is having a good position there, and they are going back to Iraq now, and the jihadis have a good position, and they are going back to Iraq now. And I think the struggle is spilling over to the other countries, and we have seen what happened in Turkey as well. So this is the position,
it's very interesting.
But I think this was not possible without the financial support of the Qataris and the Saudis.
It's very interesting. Syria has Al-Qaeda in it and affiliated groups where it never had it before. Nikolay,
well, even in Iraq, we didn't have any Al-Qaeda before 2003. Now we have
in
Al-Qaeda.
Libya, we can name them all.
Libya,
we can name them all. Libya.
Yeah.
Nikolay, you want to jump in?
I agree with my colleague that countries of the Gulf just stirred the trouble, but they are not able to stabilize the region, to stabilize Syria after that. And actually, one of the problems is that no one's really ready to take responsibility for the situation in Syria after the potential fall of Assad. No one's really. Everyone's washing his hands and saying, no, that's not our business. Just take a look at Libya.
Look at Afghanistan and look at Iraq.
Exactly. That's the problem. So
but everybody...
you have enough money and to stir the trouble, but you don't have enough experience, you don't have enough intelligence, you don't have enough military capability to stabilize the country, to destroy extremists, to
nation building is so boring. War is a lot more fun.
Yeah, but
Saad,
everybody is speaking about Syria without Assad. Yet Assad is still there, and he has the power to resist, and he has a popularity. I don't support him, of course, but even Western journals write. Mr. Fisk wrote the other day about the popular support Mr. Assad has in some areas, and nobody taking this into consideration. Everybody wants Mr. Assad to be out. Why don't you accept him and go and sit down with him and discuss things and go to the poll and see to the ballot and see what the ballot says? This is another question.
But Afshin, I wanted to ask you something because you're a keen observer of media. A few days ago, National Public Radio, very mainstream in the United States, had this huge story on their website about how Saudi Arabia is sending jihadists to Syria and giving them money, anything they want. And then we have this rebel eating a heart, okay? So, where's the disconnect here? Jihadist, cannibalism, but these people are our allies to overthrow Assad. Explain this to me.
A lot of people analyze Obama's policy by saying, they look at polls and they can see that the American public doesn't want another war. But I suppose I was thinking, on the recent trips that I made to Syria, of course, they have a vibrant Christian community all across the country. I'm wondering how they're going to sell that to the Bible Belt in the American South, that American weapons would be propping up people murdering Christians in Damascus and Aleppo.
Afshin, I think it's very interesting that you mention that, because all through the greater Middle East, Christians are an endangered species, and it has everything to do with Western interventionism.
Just take Iraq. The situation in which the Christians are in Iraq, they are almost persecuted, and many are running away from this country. And in Syria, the Christians are also suffering. They were caught in the crossfire, actually.
This is Voice of Russia, and you're listening to Debating Russia. I'm Peter Lavelle. Are we saying the end of Western neocolonialism or a new version of it?
Well, I think, certainly with the Russian context, one danger here is the rise of Turkish ideas in this region again, because they're certainly playing a very different game, a game that seems to change. I know game is probably not the right word to use. It's a bit too, war gamesy. Erdogan is playing a very dangerous game, and Moscow are going to have to get to grips with the way Turkey seems to be changing position all the time, as it is that NATO member, on the edge there.
It's very interesting because 2 years ago, Nikolay, one could make the argument that Turkey had, an amazing foreign policy. It was creating bridges all through the region. What was it? No problems foreign policy. Okay?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Now, 2 years later,
Turkish policy in the region is now, in question, but I think you have to take a look in the past when Turkey had problem with Kurdish minority, and Assad was standing behind this minority in the 90s, and later, so they had to get involved somehow, but the way they got involved
it was foolishness the way they did it, to be honest with you.
Well, yes, and I think it will end up with Turkey having to deal with the consequences.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, the refugees.
They'll have to clear
Right.
the mess,
Right.
actually.
Right.
And
Right.
no one else will be ready. Not the United States, not Saudi Arabia, no one. But Turkey is already there, and they will have to deal. So I don't know who made the bed, many countries, but the Turkish will have to sleep on it very soon.
Saad, what do you think about that?
Well,
Turkey is
I
the
think
first
I agree.
victim.
Yeah, I agree that we've been the first victim, and now we have been also a recent victim. The Kurdish fighters are moving into Baghdad, into Iraq, and they will be another bomb in the Iraqi picture. Nobody knows when it will explode because they are stationing in Iraq, the PKK, and nobody knows what they will do there. The other problem we have is the Iranian influence, which you're forgetting in the area, and it seems that the Iranian influence and Iranian role is more important, more influential in Iraq than the American and the Russian in this area. And we have given the two other regional power, Turkey and Iran, a bigger role than they can have in their hands. And this is another problem. But I think the Turks were doing very well until the Syrian crisis, and they have Mr. Erdogan have went in the wrong way in dealing with the Syrian crisis, and I think I don't know how he's going to get out of it without any damage to his position or to his country, because the economy of Turkey is depending on Syria and Iraq and the Gulf through Iraq as well. So how he's going to get out of this problem, I don't know.
And PKK oil from Iraq, seemingly.
Yeah,
Okay.
and PKK stationed near the pipelines.
Yeah.
This program perfectly demonstrates how everything is interconnected here. Afshin, maybe I've lived in Russia too long, but who benefits from all of this? Can you name one?
Obviously, I mean, I know we're kind of laughing about it, but it is very serious, the number of dead and the scale of the atrocities of NATO foreign policy, NATO countries' foreign policy. And at the same time, as has been mentioned, the almost suicidal policy in terms of Washington's interests. None of this benefits Washington. I suppose who is winning out of all of this are these other regional powers, as Professor Jawad said, but hopefully foreign policies of non-aligned movement countries. I mean, we've got to. I lived in Tehran for quite a long time, amidst all these burgeoning hostilities and the threat of military action against Tehran, and hundreds of world leaders were there, not reported in the international corporate media, at the non-aligned movement summits. So this is all good, but of course, I think the big elephant in the room is the power of the Persian Gulf countries. I differ a little about the fact they're not good enough or not coherent enough in terms of their foreign policies to fill the vacuum. I think they probably are. And then when you add to that the dangers of Takfiri Salafism, I mean, that's the big danger, which the United States is supporting.
Saudi Arabia and Qatar as great exporters of democracy. Okay. Nikolay, you want to jump in? Go ahead.
So actually, I wanted to add that in the short run, the winners are Saudi Arabia and Qatar, as you've said it, because they managed to show that they have regional influence. They are the leaders of the Arab world. Well, de facto. And they've crushed their enemies and potential allies of Iran. In the short run, it's a victory for them.
Obviously, I should just interrupt there and say the Salafis obviously want to overthrow the government of Saudi Arabia as well, and of Qatar.
Oh, wow, great
and the Taliban
think
office
alike
that's opened there.
Yeah, but in my opinion, in the short term, also Israel is the winner of all in the Middle East, because they are in the short run.
That's a very well. I think in the short run, because it's. I find it really quite interesting is that Israel, because of its actions, and Lebanon created Hezbollah. Israel, because it wanted to divide the Palestinians, created Hamas. What are they going to do with Syria? I mean, who in Syria is going to say, "Thank you, Israel, thank you"? I don't think that's ever going to happen. Professor,
I think
Jawad,
when I said in the short term, Israel now feels safe because all the countries around it are indulge in their own problems and in their own internal problems, and nobody is speaking about defying or supporting the Palestinians, and the Israelis are becoming more adamant in the policies of Mr. Netanyahu and this government, Likud government. But I think in the end they will be the loser as usual, because whatever they create in the Middle East, it will be against them, whether the Ikhwan al-Muslimin or the Salafis or the Jihadis or even Mr. Assad, if he stays in power, they will all be against what Israel have done to them.
I think the Zionist state is in deep trouble, actually. Sheikh Nasrallah can be on television last week saying we've got weapons from the Damascus government on television. Obama says nothing and says we'll hit Israel with this.
Of course. Yeah, I agree with you.
The Israelis are very much concerned, and they're simply scared by the things that happen just around them. Well, they fear that the region will be destabilized.
You reap what you sow. You reap what you sow.
No, they want stable regimes around them, no matter what kind of regimes. Whether Assad, whether not Assad, but they want stable regimes. Now all these things are falling apart, and they're worried about what will happen to Israel.
Stable regimes according to their test, not according to the people's test. They want regimes they choose, they enforce, not people choose and they and decide.
Well, Israel likes to work with dictators, and they don't like democratically elected people.
Yeah, but even dictators like Saddam Hussein, they did not like, because he has the courage to hit them with some missiles. You see what I mean? They want dictators like the dictators in the Gulf, who support them, who have secret relations with them, who coordinate with them against the Palestinians, the Hamas and Hezbollah, but they do not want dictators who could defy them.
But it is a kind of failed state anyway. Without the U.S. subsidy, Israel would collapse in a week. So talking about Israel as if it's a coherent nation state anyway seems absurd in the current situation.
Actually, I want to ask you a question because we're almost out of time here. You mentioned Iran here. I mean, if there's going to be, and I think it's extremely unlikely, because I don't think Western powers want a negotiated settlement in Syria, but if there were to be one, Iran would have to be part of the equation.
That's right.
They don't like that.
Sergei Lavrov seems to have said that Iran hasn't responded to the request about talks that are hopefully going to be arranged by the end of June, or beginning of June, to talk about what's happening in Syria. I presume that's a consequence of the complex presidential campaign in Tehran, in Iran at the moment, because of course it's in a huge amount of electoral instability, like any nation, happening in Iran right now. I presume they will be part of those talks. How will President Obama sell that to his people? President Obama, the American government, have shown no signs of any interest before Moscow finally said, jaw is better than war. So at least Obama is doing something, I have to say, compared to London and Paris. Berlin, ironically, is also supporting Moscow and Washington in this.
We're almost out of time. I just hope we don't go through this political charade for the Western powers and NATO to say, well, we tried peace. Now everything is still on the table. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for a fascinating discussion. I want to thank our listeners for listening, staying with Voice of Russia. You're listening to Debating Russia on Voice of Russia. I'm Peter Lavelle, and I'm discussing the Middle East with Saad Jawad, and we have Afshin Rattansi, and here in Moscow with me is Nikolay Surkov.